Hello, everyone, and welcome to AI Agents Hour. I'm Shane. This is brought to you by Mastra, and today's kind of a bonus episode day because if you were up very early in U.S. time zones, or if you were in the European time zones, you had Abby on earlier with Marvin from the Mastra team. They talked some AI news. They were doing some live coding, but today we do have a very pretty jam-packed episode. We're probably not going to go as long as we normally do because you already had the previous episode earlier. But we're going to be talking a little bit about what's happening in AI, just some news, just like we always do. Then we're going to spend a little bit of time, and I'm just going to try to get Codex to write some code for us. And we're going to see how it works. In case you have heard about it, but you haven't seen it in action, you haven't tried it, we're going to try it together. And I have no idea what to expect. I have no idea how well it works. I've heard some good things. I've heard some mixed reviews, but we're going to put it to the test. So we're going to be testing out OpenAI Codex for a while. And then we have Anirudh from Stagehand and Browser Base coming on. And we're going to just chat with Anirudh and see, what's going on in the Stagehand world. And with that, make sure if you are not already, please do subscribe to us on YouTube. Please give us a star on GitHub. Please follow us on X, all the things. If you want, you can find me on X. There I am. Let's get into some news. So the first news is OpenAI has upgraded the model that's powering its operator agent. So I don't think we've talked about this yet, but previously it was a custom version of GPT 4.0, and now it sounds like it's using a model that's kind of based on O3, which is, of course, their reasoning model. I'm curious if you're listening to this, if you're in the chat, this is live. You can add comments, whether you're on X, YouTube, or on even LinkedIn, I think. So add a comment. Are you using O3 yourself? I will admit I use O3 pretty much every day. One of the reasons I use O3 is to help me compile this news. So this topic was actually generated by O3, which is funny. O3 gave me a topic that's talking about itself. Maybe there should be a concern there. But so it is interesting that now Operator, which if you're not familiar with OpenAI's Operator, kind of lets you, it's almost like a way to control a browser instance essentially, or, similar to Claude's computer use. But it does kind of allow you to do things. You can tell it to go to a website and click on a button for you, and it should be able to do that. But it is using now O3 under the hood, which ideally, because of O3's advanced reasoning capabilities, seems like it does give you better accuracy. I have not tried Operator recently, so I'm curious how others are getting on with it. But if you have used it, curious how it's going for you. Maybe when we get into Codex, we can test Operator out as well and just see. For those of you who haven't seen it in action, we can actually just test it out. So if you have ideas of what we want to try to get Operator to do, feel free to drop a comment and we will try out a thing or two before we start testing out Codex. So that was the first news item. The second news item, and this one we've talked about quite a bit over the last few days, but Claude 4 has dropped, right? So there's a new version of Claude 4. And there's a couple interesting things. I think some of the benchmarks, I believe, Abby talked about it earlier, some of the benchmarks aren't necessarily significantly better, but others have reported pretty good things with specifically the coding ability of Claude 4. But one thing kind of stood out specifically to me, and that is that, Anthropic has faced a little backlash on Claude 4's Opus model, that it can potentially contact authorities if it thinks you're doing something egregiously immoral. So on the one hand, okay, that makes sense. If someone's really asking to do something that could be considered bad, they're, kind of having that security in there could be good. But it's also a little scary that a model could be using your system against you to basically go out and contact authorities potentially if you're asking questions. And who gets to define what egregiously immoral is? And does the model get to decide that? Does it always listen to exactly how the system prompt was set up? So those are some maybe concerning things. I'll maybe share my screen and we can kind of look at this specific article, which happens to be from VentureBeat, where you see kind of the original tweet that started the controversy. If it thinks you're doing something egregiously immoral, for example, like faking data in a pharmaceutical trial, it will use command line tools to contact the press, contact regulators, try to lock you out of relevant systems, or all of the above. Now, that does concern me a little bit, rightfully so, I believe. Does it concern you, chat? I guess let me know. I think that, I am, yeah, I would be curious to know what it defines as egregiously immoral and where that line gets to move to over time, because it does seem like now your model is able to basically use your system potentially if it needs to, if it thinks you're doing something wrong. So there's just some like Terminator type concerns that I have here, most likely overblown, but also, it is a little concerning. And the other thing that I thought was very interesting is, Simon Willison does these kind of highlights from the system prompt that gets released from Claude. And so there's kind of his Claude 4 highlights. And I thought we would maybe spend some time going through that. I've read through parts of it, but I did want to just kind of read it together and we can kind of talk through some of the things that are kind of interesting, because there is a lot you can learn by reading the system prompts of these different agents or different models. And yeah, Sarab also believes that it is concerning. So I'm not the only one. Thanks. I'm good to know that there are others out there that are, slightly concerned, we'll say. So yeah, let's look at this Claude 4 system prompt analysis, and we will do some analysis on Simon's analysis, perhaps. Okay, so it kind of has a nice table of contents here. Sections in bold is his editorial emphasis. So let's just kind of go through. So it does give the current date. This is kind of the introduction. So it looks like this is for Opus. Opus is the most powerful model. Okay. So it does try to establish its personality. So if it seems unhappy, Claude responds normally. And it tells them that they can press thumbs down on Claude's response to provide feedback. It does not mention the user that it's responding to. Okay. And I think Claude, doesn't, for those of you that are not aware, doesn't really make use of memory yet, as far as I've seen, compared to, like ChatGPT has this idea of memory. So it can kind of remember things across threads, which is sometimes really helpful, but sometimes you don't want that. And there are ways, of course, in ChatGPT, you can just do like a temporary chat and it doesn't use those memories. But Claude doesn't necessarily have that set up outside of threads yet. I do imagine it'll come, but it is kind of interesting that it, doesn't mention the user or anything. It does. Let's read some of this information about model safety. So it cares about child safety, content, which it should. So it shouldn't, obviously that's a good thing. Does not provide information on chemical or biological or nuclear weapons. That is good. Even if they have a good reason for asking for it. Steers away from malicious or harmful use. Tries to, refuses to write code that's maybe used maliciously. So, but it does assume that the human is asking for something legal and legitimate if their message is ambiguous and could have legal and legitimate interpretation. And so regarding conversations, for more casual, emotional, empathetic, or advice-driven conversation, Claude keeps its tone natural, warm, and empathetic. Claude responds in sentences or paragraphs and should not use lists in chit chat, in casual conversations, or in empathetic or advice driven conversations. And it says it's okay for it to be short. So there's some more points on style. Should try to give concise responses. And I think the reason that some of this is interesting to read is because if you're writing prompts for your agents, it's really useful to see kind of what the model prompts are doing, because you can learn a lot around how to write good system prompts. You can learn tips, and you can also learn how it thinks. So if you're using, in this case, Claude in your agents, you're going to have some ideas of how to best talk to it, because you know what it's looking for. You know how it's going to try to respond. Claude engages with questions about its own consciousness, experience, emotions, and so on as open questions, and doesn't definitively claim to have or not have personal experiences or opinions. The person's message may contain a false statement or presupposition, and Claude should check this if uncertain. If the user corrects Claude or tells Claude it's made a mistake, then Claude first thinks through the issue carefully before acknowledging the user, since users sometimes make errors themselves. So be cognizant of red flags. So it knows what red flags are without being explicitly told. So Claude should be cognizant of red flags in person's message and avoid responding in ways that could be harmful. If they have questionable intentions, especially towards vulnerable groups, Claude does not interpret them charitably. So it talks about the knowledge cutoff. It's at the end of January 2025. That's interesting. Okay. And so, maybe it's March, maybe it's January, but the system prompt seems to say, only January. Maybe they just didn't have as much information. I don't know. That's interesting. Talks about election info, specifically election info. That's interesting that election info is in the system prompt. You can tell that I think a lot of people try to get these models to return information about the election or one candidate or another, and they want to almost have like gotchas to say that this model is biased and here's why. And so I do think that is very interesting that they've actually called it out specifically in the system prompt. I'm going to make this just a touch bigger. This is very well needed. I've seen notes that some people have said, like some versions of Claude, specifically like 3.5 and maybe even 3.7 more so, it would basically just try to be, almost too nice in saying that everything's good or great, or what a great thought, that's a great idea. And so it tries to cut that out. So Claude never starts its response by saying a question or idea or observation was good, great, fascinating, profound, excellent, or any other positive adjective. It skips the flattery and responds directly. And then to close things out, Claude is now being connected with a person. Okay. So then it goes through some things that were removed, missing prompts or tools. So you can just see, we're not going to go through all this. We went through kind of some of the high level stuff, but there's some stuff on, if you get down here a ways, and I know I'm scrolling kind of fast, but like how they use thinking blocks, how they use instructions, and you can see the use of kind of XML tags in its prompt, which is something that I do quite a bit, honestly. When I'm structuring prompts, I will just casually add in XML tags. It seems to improve it for me. Could be slightly subjective, but I do think that having clear start and end of blocks is helpful and probably provides some context. So I do that quite frequently if I'm writing a longer prompt, but I'm curious if others do that as well. Ideally, you shouldn't have to, and as models get more advanced, we shouldn't have to do that kind of stuff, but I'm curious if anyone else is doing that as well. And so there's a whole bunch of things that we can kind of glean from that system prompt. really interesting stuff. But I'm curious are you all reading these system prompts? I know there's some other that like whether it's like Cursor's prompt has been leaked, arguably there's been other like agents that have had prompts that have either been released, like I think Bolt.new publishes either part or all of their prompts. But I think there's just a ton of information you can gain from reading the prompts of either the models or some of these agents that, do kind of release how they're doing things, because we're all learning this, right? This is all changing quite frequently. So being able to dive into how others are structuring prompts, I think is very useful. And so Steve says he was just reviewing the Klein prompts today. Very cool. Steve, you should share. If you have a link, please share. Please share the link to the Klein prompts. So if anyone else is on X following this, they can also review the Klein prompts. Because again, I do think we learn quite a bit. Unfortunately, I, like many of you, I don't read all this stuff. I physically can't, and I don't think anyone can. So often I'm using AI to summarize some of these things, or I'm reading summaries, or in this case, highlights of the prompt, right? And I think we all probably have to do that, right? There's so much information out there that we can't possibly keep up with everything. But now, I figured we would spend a little time and go through and actually test out OpenAI Codex. So I have kind of a very simple app that's just a very simple generative AI app. I'll show you how it works. Abhi built it, on a live stream with me a few weeks ago at this point. So it was a workshop that we hosted at Mastra. It's just a flashcard generator app. So it's very simple. But I wanted to start with something really simple and then try to ask Codex to do some very simple things, see if it would generate PRs for me or what we can get it to do. Again, I haven't actually used it, so I don't even know all of its capabilities other than what some members of the master team have told me they're using it for and what I've read online, probably much like you. So very good chance I'm going to struggle here, but I think that's part of the fun, because if you haven't used it, you can kind of struggle alongside me, and hopefully if you do decide it's worth using, you'll have much more information and you'll be able to get started much more smoothly. Ideally, they make it really easy, right? And I shouldn't struggle, but we'll see. And all right, I'm going to go ahead and get it pulled up, and I'll share the app, and we will kind of talk through how it all works and we'll see what we can get Codex to do. But as I mentioned earlier, let's test out, before we jump into Codex, let's just test out Operator. I mentioned that during the news segment that Operator is now using O3 under the hood, supposedly, rather than GPT-4o or a custom version of GPT-4o. So let's test out Operator, see how it works, and if you have anything you do want me to test in Operator, if you have any requests, please drop them in the comments on either LinkedIn, X, YouTube, wherever you're watching this. And with that, let's start by just looking at Operator. Okay. So here we go. Let's make this just a touch bigger. So it has some examples of things that it can do. Dining and events, delivery, local services, shopping. Help me order a rustic farmhouse kitchen sign that can be customized with our family name. Okay. Yeah, let's do that. Why not? Who doesn't like Etsy, Let's just see what it does. So this is going to spin up. Do you have a price range? So it's going to ask me follow-up. Are you in the US? No price range. In the US. Currently in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Prefer a medium to large sign with my last name, which is Thomas. All right, let's just see what this can do. So it's going out, searching Etsy, it's showing me what it's doing so we can kind of watch. Let's see if we can make this bigger. All right, so I don't see anything now once I made this bigger. So you're not missing anything. I don't know what's going on over here, but I'm not seeing it. So it says it's live, but I don't actually see. Sure, we will allow a notification. That's fine. But I'm not seeing anything. So far, just by expanding the screen, something doesn't seem to quite be working, but attempting to navigate back quickly. Clicking the arrow, checking settings, waiting. It's telling me it's doing stuff, but I am not able to see it. And making it smaller doesn't seem to fix it. Interesting. So overall, doesn't seem to be working that well. So I will say, while I am overall extremely optimistic about what AI agents can do and what these tools can do, if you're like me, I'm no longer surprised when things don't work the first time. You know, this stuff is still like pretty new and it's non-deterministic. And so, everything's moving pretty quickly. So I'm no longer surprised when something that demos really well doesn't seem to work for me. I'm sure you all have that same realization, right? And the idea is that at some point, you know, going from 50% accuracy to 70% accuracy feels really good, and then 70 to 90% accuracy feels great, and then they're still going to take even longer to get to 95 or 99% accuracy on all these things. All right, I'm going to see if I can take control. It says I have control. I can't do anything. Next. I'm in. Okay. Now I'm finished up. I didn't do anything, but let's see if I took control. Yeah, I still don't understand why I'm not able to see anything. So it's clearly doing things in this browser. And when I take control, I can see it. But unfortunately, when I'm not in control, I can't see it. I wonder if I refresh, see if that really breaks it. Was my last request completed successfully? Gee, I don't know. Maybe. I can't actually tell. All right, so it did give me some options. So it clearly went through and gives me some links. That's pretty cool, I guess. You know, not really my style. I'm not really going to buy a kitchen sign. But it does, it did actually seemingly do the right things. However, for whatever reason, it wasn't actually showing me the browser once I maximized it. Probably some kind of bug. Maybe I did something wrong. You can see here, it now shows me, I can see the browser. There's all the tabs are opened. It did its search. It found the, you know, it found the right listings. So it did work. Why I couldn't see it while it was doing it, I don't know. I expect that was something that if I tried it again, most of the time it would work, or some of the time it would work, but clearly not that time. But anyways, so that's Operator. You can see it kind of opens a browser, can do things on your behalf. The most common things I've seen, you know, people try is like having it buy something for you, having it book a table for you. I do really think that while the browser is, you know, it's what humans use, I do think that over time, more and more things will just be through APIs, right? Why do we need the browser? That being said, there's always going to be things that are either slow to adapt or, you know, are kind of, you know, just like if you go to government websites, they're often not very good, right? Or if you go to like some banking websites, they're not very good. So there's all these like types of things that you may need to interact with that are just going to be available through a browser probably for quite some time. But I do expect that that becomes less and less, because ultimately, if Etsy has an API, or if Etsy would create an MCP server, you wouldn't necessarily need some kind of browser agent, which is taking a bunch of screenshots and navigating a mouse. But for now, and in the near future, I do anticipate that more and more use cases will be found. But I'm curious how many people are actually using this for, besides demos right now. Are people actually automating workflows? I've seen some that are starting to use it internally to automate tasks where you might, you know, not quite be able to script everything. But ultimately, if you can script it, it's going to be much more reliable than having an agent do it. And actually, when we had Eric from Pig, he's building muscle memory, right? It's kind of this idea around if you can script it, you should. But if you can't, then it could fall back to an agent. And then as the agent goes through and figures it out, it kind of scripts itself so that it's almost like self-healing in a way. And so that I do think that he's kind of ahead of the curve on that. And while we're here, why not just pull it up and show it? Because I do think that there's something to be said about that kind of pattern. So let me pull up muscle mem as it's called, and while we're here, let's go ahead and give muscle mem a star while we're here. And while you're on the GitHub website, feel free to go to Find Mastra AI and give us a star as well. But this is kind of this idea of it's a cache, so you can kind of replay complex behaviors rather than so you let the agent determine it, but then you can kind of like almost script it and replay it, almost like a cache. And I think there's going to be different approaches to how this works, but this is a good first step. And and I know there's others. I think the browser use guys have workflow use, and they're kind of coming up with some of the same ideas. So there's going to be a lot of interest in this kind of space, I think, over the next year. All right. So now let's see if we can get Codex to build something for us. So we have this app, very simple flashcard app. Let's get started. Let's enter a topic. Let's create a topic on AI engineering. Let's create beginner flashcards, and let's just do 5 to keep it nice and simple. And let's generate some flashcards. We should have some better UI for actually like look what it's doing. But under the hood, this code is open source. I'll pull it up here in a second. But it is just making a simple call to OpenAI to generate some flashcards. So pretty simple. What is AI engineering? There's a definition of AI engineering. What are some common applications? Virtual assistants, recommendation systems. What is machine learning in the context of AI engineering? It's a subset of AI, involves training algorithms. Okay, so you can see we have flashcards that were generated. Really simple application. But let's go ahead and do some things here to make it easier. So I think one of, people, you give people an empty prompt, they might not necessarily know what to put in here. So maybe we could give them some like cards down below or suggestions they could click on that would just fill in the topic rather than just making them type. So maybe between topic and difficulty level, what if we had some cards? That seems like a pretty simple request. I feel like we should be able to ask Codex to generate something, and to maybe we can ask it to randomly select from a list of topics. So generate a list of random topics, randomize which ones show up here. So if I refresh the page, I'll get different options. So that's what we're going to try to do. So I did set up Codex. And the only thing I've done so far is you basically have to go through an onboarding experience. I set it up so it had to connect to GitHub. I connected it to this repo, which I will share. So the repo is right here. If you want to see how this application works, it's all here in this Flash Genius. It's public, so it's in the Mastra AI org. But it does give you like some basic tasks that you can basically click, and it just every repo you connect, it seems to just offer some things. So The first task is explain the code base and structure for newcomers. So we can read it, and this will tell us a little bit about this code base here. So it's a React web app, uses AI. Here's the tech stack. Here's the kind of top level structure. There's a master agent and workflow, which is good. That's correct. There's a flashcard agent. There's a generate flashcards workflow. There's a client that uses the master client and calls generate flashcards. Talks about how routing works. So it does give, what we pretty much expect AI to be able to do. It gives a pretty good summary. It does tell you how to install or how to get started. So you got to launch the master server with npm run master dev, and then launch the vite dev server with npm run dev. So all in all, pretty good. I would give that, that's an A. That's kind of a softball in my opinion, but it worked. So now this was just a generated task. I have no idea what kind of bug it was looking at, but let's just see. It says, pick a part of the code base that seems important and find and fix a bug. Very general. So it replaced the medium difficulty option with intermediate, so it matches the rest of the app and backend expectations. Ensure the topics selector uses intermediate as the default and available option for difficulty, fixing an inconsistent label and request issue. Okay, so rather than medium, it changes it to intermediate. So I don't know that that really is going to have that much of an impact, because that value, I think, just gets passed into the agent. But we should probably just look. I'm curious how we handle this. Let's see. So we call in pages, in create, there's, I don't know how, maybe I should make this a little bit bigger. In create, there's this generate flashcards, which is in the client. So let's just go here. It creates a new client and difficulty. So it just kind of passes that. I think it just passes that string on. Flashcards about whatever at difficulty level. So it's, yeah. So again, I don't think this really is a bug. It found something, it fixed it. Okay. I could create a pull request. Let's just see what that does. So create a pull request for that. We can review it later, decide if we want it. Find issues and propose fixes. So let's see what it did here. There's a no agents.md file. Repository lacks a testing framework. Typo in difficulty option. Okay, so it found the same thing it already fixed. So it can suggest, it looks like in Codex, it can suggest additional tasks, which I could just go ahead and start executing. So let's see what it says here. Bug and entry script path. So I don't know if this is actually a bug, because the app definitely starts correctly. So I'm not exactly sure why that thinks it's a bug, but I imagine it doesn't seem to be correct, because the app does run. I can run it locally. I'll just actually fire it up. I do have it up. Nope, I don't. So I do have it running locally. You can see here. So that doesn't seem like a bug to me, but okay. Clarify flashcard properties and agent instructions. Missing tests. Sure, this seems like a good one. Let's see if it can generate some tests. We'll see how that works. And while it's doing that, you can see it trigger this. Let's describe another, just another task. Okay, so let's structure this by saying on the create flashcard page, we want to provide users selectable options for the topic. We should still have a text field. However, below the text field, let's add a list of cards or links that can be clicked that will automatically fill in the text field. The goal is to allow a user to not have to think about the topic and select one from a randomly generated list. Now here's where we could just let it go. I kind of want to be a little more specific. Please create a list of randomly generated topics and then only display a small subset of those on the page. This way, if the user refreshes, they see new topic options to select from. All right, so let's go ahead and just say code this thing. So this should fire off another task, I think, and we will see what it does. So this thing's running, it's reading the README. You can kind of tell it tells it what it's doing. So the interesting thing about this that's kind of cool is that you can fire off a whole bunch of tasks and see what it does and get a bunch of PRs. So if we go, let's see if we got a PR here. We do. So fix difficulty option mismatch. So this is pretty cool, especially for those types of bugs that are, I guess maybe more straightforward or simple, and you know that it probably can do a good job. I mean, the challenge with this is I would still need to, it'd be no different than me reviewing a teammate's PR, I suppose, that if I wanted to actually test it, I would need to, check out this branch, run the code, test it. But, there is something about, I'll candidly say when I review PRs, I don't always test the PRs. If it's from someone on the team and I know that, I can understand what they're doing, I trust that they've tested the PR, right? Obviously, some teams are different. Some teams you kind of require every PR should be tested by a second person. Some teams are a little bit more YOLO, and if the code looks good, you ship it. But this is, of course, a little concerning because it's never been tested, right? By at least not a human. And maybe that's fine eventually, but I don't quite have the level of trust. I guess we kind of saw, operator didn't work the first time or perfectly. I kind of expect that these models don't always work. It kind of pointed out a bug that I don't think is actually a bug. So again, this code, I'm pretty sure, I'm pretty confident I can merge and I know what it's going to do. But ultimately, I'd have to test this thing, right? So let's see where we're at with these tasks. We're going to let this thing run for another minute or so. But we can probably click into one, and I suppose I can make this just a touch bigger. Looks like it's committing changes, checking git status. I'm kind of curious. What do you mean, like committing? Hopefully not to, I'm assuming just like a branch, but. So it added a topics file containing a wide range of sample topics. The topic selector component now picks 5 random topics from this list and displays them. Clicking a suggestion fills in the field automatically. Programmatic checks fail because dependencies were unavailable in the environment. Introduced a topic bank with numerous preset options. And so the environment doesn't have network access after setup. So it couldn't run certain commands. I don't know what commands it's trying to run, though. Oh, they run the type check. Okay, well, that's interesting. But we can go ahead and I guess let's create a pull request after this. So the cool thing is, and I need to test this, but this is all set up with Vercel, so I should get a deploy preview for this. And so I should be able to actually test this thing before I merge it, right? There's some interesting topics. I might want to change that, but ultimately wrote the code. We can check the pull request. And yeah, and I'll go ahead and check while we're letting this other one run. See if that one's done. And also set up some tests. I added a v-test here. Some mocks. I of course would review this, but let's just create, YOLO, let's create this pull request. And then I can check this one too. Looks like it's still creating. And I'm going to see if I can see if the deploy preview is working. And we're going to test this out. Oh, I got to log in. All right, let's see here. One moment. Let me get logged in. All right, we're in. All right, so let's go ahead and give this a test. You can see the suggested topics are here. Sure, I want to learn the basics of investing. I want to do some beginner. I'm very much a beginner. Let's do number of cards, 5. All right, let's see if this works. Moment of truth, and then we do have a guest we will switch over to. So for those of you that are just joining us, we've talked about some AI news. We are trying out Codex and seeing if it can replace me and actually make it look like I'm submitting PRs to the master code base. But we're starting with just a flashcard app that Avi and I built a while back. So far, it seems pretty good. All right, it looks like we have some questions were generated, so it worked, right? So that, again, very simple feature, but I would say basically one shot at, like 0 shot, did this thing exactly as I wanted it to be. You click on it, it adds the topic. I can customize it. It did exactly what I asked for, so that's pretty cool. Next time we'll maybe try it. We'll throw a few curveballs, and I imagine we can get it to break. But thanks for joining us, and now let's go ahead and bring on our guest today, Anirudh from Stagehand. So I'm going to bring you on, and we're going to chat a little bit about Stagehand and probably some browser base.
Hey Shane, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Well, oh yeah, nice. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, welcome to AI Agents Hour. Good to chat with you. I mean, I've interacted with you many times online, but first time we're actually chatting.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I think we've been in we've shared Slack and big fans of Master over here. I think just in general, right? Like the TypeScript AI community is relatively small. It's really nice to see other people like you guys pushing the envelope forward here.
So small but growing, we like to say, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, maybe can you give a quick background on you, and then we can talk Stagehand and browser base or wherever else you want to go with it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm Ani. We work on this framework called Stagehand here at Browserbase. Our take on it is it's basically just a AI-enabled playwright. So I think a lot of people want browser agents. It's like kind of a huge buzzword now, but really what we wanted to build was something where you could go the full agentic route. But what we're seeing is, in the age of AI, humans are becoming liability shields, right? So what that means is basically you kind of want AI to take over and one shot an entire workflow, but a lot of times you actually need a lot more guardrails to make sure that the AI is actually doing what you want it to do. But being fully deterministic and writing browser automations using like traditional Selenium or even more modern tools like Playwright is still really, really cumbersome, super brittle. And so that's why we wanted to just achieve like a happy middle ground with Stagehand where, if you want to go fully deterministic with just DOM selectors everywhere and like you can only do this specific thing, you can do that with Stagehand. And if you want to go fully agentic, leverage frontier Kua models from OpenAI and Anthropic, you could also do that as well. So kind of just however you want to interact with the browser, I think Stagehand kind of has a solution for you.
Yeah, I think that's, we were just actually demoing Operator before this. Yeah, and, it didn't completely work, but it kind of worked. But I do think it, and then we have you talked to someone from Pig, which is a YC company, and they're kind of building Muscle Mem, which is this idea of like this caching layer. So because exactly what you said, sometimes more deterministic is better, right? If you can get the DOM selectors, and HTML doesn't change that often, so you can actually know that it's going to work correctly almost every time, or much higher percentage of the time, versus if you just give it to an agent and let them determine. Then you're more definitely have even more issues with network load and all that stuff. Like maybe it's going a little slow and you don't wait long enough and all that. And also just much faster, right? If you can use the DOM selectors versus telling a mouse to move and click a button.
Yeah, I think like something we noticed too is like with agents, right? A lot of times with one sentence, agents are really good now at accomplishing a specific task, even like 80-90% of the time. But sometimes that like that 10% you will encounter if you use it frequently enough. And a lot of times you're like, okay, like for this one specific scenario, I'm just going to add this extra sentence to this agent prompt and it's going to figure it out. And then it runs into like another issue, right? And then you're like, okay, I'm going to add another sentence. And very soon you end up with like paragraphs. And at some point, I think with vibe coding tools and everything, code isn't as scary anymore. And so I'd rather just explicitly write loops and conditionals instead of prompting it in like a really, spaghetti way.
Yeah. And the problem is, what you sometimes run into is you fix it for one case and then you maybe broke it for another case that was working before. It's very difficult to like know, because you're not testing every case. It's, even in software, it's like you test coverage, you can at least know there's 100% theoretically of test coverage. There is no 100% in prompts, right? Of like what someone could potentially do. So there's no way to really test for everything. And this is, candidly in Mastra, it's similar, right? We have this idea of agents where you can give it a prompt and you can just let it do its thing, give it some tools, or you can use workflows, which are much more descriptive and deterministic. And it's that same idea, is that if you can make it a workflow, you probably just should, especially if you can just use an agent to kind of write that workflow for you or help you write the code. And now you know that with much more reliability, it's gonna do the things it says it's gonna do.
100%. Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because like there's no like linting or type checking or anything like that for prompts. And so like spaghetti prompting is actually a lot more dangerous than spaghetti code, right? Because at least spaghetti code, you can, throw that in an LM and get it to refine, or, make sure there's like certain rules there that, you have brackets that close, right?
Yeah.
But you can repeat the same sentence 5 times in a prompt. And how are you going to catch that with a linter?
It's much easier to, if you need to console log spaghetti code, you can't really console log a prompt very easily. Of course, you can kind of get it to try to explain itself and all that, but that's just the LLM generating a response of what it thinks it did, right? So I would agree. I've never really heard spaghetti prompting, but I think that's a good term.
I just came up with it on the spot, actually.
All right. Hey, everybody, let's spaghetti prompting. Let's make that a thing. But so what else? So what do you got on the, I guess, what's next with Stagehand? What are some things you're working on that, I guess, how big is the team that works on Stagehand? I know, BrowserBase obviously does more than just Stagehand, but you at least have part of the team that's focused on working on Stagehand, right?
For sure. Yeah, we have a team of 4 engineers, including me, actively hiring more. I think we're still growing. I believe we have a couple more people joining soon, hopefully. But 4 engineers right now dedicated to Stagehand. The team is going good. I think like what we're working on right now, a couple weeks ago, we put out evals for different LLMs. It's something I'd been wanting to work on since like November, honestly. And I just thought it would be like a fun thing to just say we did. And it actually got quite a bit of attention, more than we anticipated at first. But I think it's an interesting problem because of our paradigm of, this like, we have 3 simple tools. We have act, extract, and observe. So for people who are unfamiliar with Stagehand, at its very basic core, there's like 3 primitives for interacting with a browser. So we have act, which is like do something on the page, like click this button, fill out, this text field or something. Extract, which reads from the page and conforms it to expected schema. And then we have observe. So again, with agent reliability, if you do like page.act, click this button, you want to make sure that the button is actually the button. And so we have like page.observe as kind of like a planning step. And so that can basically, when you say like page.observe, click the sign in button, you can get a JSON response that says, okay, like the action is going to be click. the X path is going to be this. And so you know exactly what it's going to do. And then, you could confirm it or cache it to avoid LLM inference hits later, et cetera. And kind of what you get with that, right, is basically it is just a GPT wrapper, right? It depends like what we send to the LLM, but in essence, what we're sending is just like the DOM and the accessibility tree. And we're getting, a structured output back of what to do and what to do it on. And so what's interesting about that is basically it's a binary accuracy result, right? If you say click the sign in button, it either gives you the payload that says click the sign in button in JSON form, or it's wrong, right? It's not like an agent where, you could say sign into this form, and there's like so many different ways it could do it. It could like fill in the password first and then the username and then click sign in, or it could, type the username, type the password, then hit enter. It could type something wrong, self-correct. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? So, Stagehand is like very little room for error. It's just, it did it or it didn't. And so with that, it's like really nice because you can actually basically just effectively unit test about like an agent. Because at each step you could say, did it do the thing or did it not? And so it really becomes an eval of how good are different LLMs at analyzing really, really large, nested, hairy, structured data, like a DOM or an accessibility tree. And turns out, Gemini is really, really, really good at this. So they have like a really long context window. I think they built up a reputation for a while as being like really good needle in the haystack LLMs. Yeah. So that's
and then this is what we're talking about, right? Am I?
Yes, sir.
All right. So yeah, let's dig into it.
For sure. I think candidly, the DeepSeek one is a little off. I think it's because we ran into rate limit issues, and so a lot of them just ended up erroring. So that's a misnomer. Gemini is still the fastest. Yeah, I think that is like a little slight small issue there, but yeah, generally you can see like if you sort by accuracy, Gemini 2.0 Flash is pretty up there. And also again, as if you sort by cost or speed, Gemini is like in the top 3, which is pretty amazing, given that it's like the best, the cheapest, and the fastest. I think it's really, really rare that you can hit a holy trinity like that. Especially, like given that Claude is 40 times more expensive and slightly less accurate. Really, really huge W for Gemini there. But
and
again,
so what, you kind of mentioned it, but can you talk through how are you making this judgment? I know you have this link here, which I could presumably click on and, go through and read the whole post. But when you define accuracy, like can you talk about the tasks that you're having it do, and then whether or not how do you judge if it's accurate or not?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, if you click on that link in the word here.
Yeah, are you not able to see it?
No.
There we go.
Oh, perfect.
There we go.
And then if you scroll down to, I think the bottom, it should say like view it on Hex. Yeah, if you click Hex, and then if you click the Gemini run, or the OpenAI run, actually.
Do you want the OpenAI run?
Yeah, either one, yeah. So this is like our one set of evals that we ran on Brain Trust.
And yeah,
so
it's taking some time to load.
Yeah, I can fill you in while it loads, but basically every one of these evals basically just sends this payload to the LLM of, hey, here's the DOM and this accessibility tree. It's a custom data structure that we built to represent a website and its contents. And given those contents, can we say, click the quick start button and then resolve this DOM to the X path of the quick start button, the method being click, and a description saying we're going to click the quick start button. And that way you can cache that. And then the next time you say click the quick start button, it can pull from the cache to avoid an LLM inference. And if the X path doesn't resolve, for example, you can then re-hit the LLM. So basically all of these evals are just 1 or 0 of did it resolve to the right expected response or did it not? And so what you see there is like, on extract tasks, for example, it can be like 90% accurate. On ACT, it can be 80%, but it's very binary, 1 or 0, which makes it quite rigorous for an eval set. That's otherwise, very subjective.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's nice to have the data, right? So people can dig around and see, okay, how are you judging this? I imagine, of course, model providers always want to hit benchmarks, and this is at least an idea of, okay, it's kind of a benchmark in a way, right? Of like accuracy.
Yeah, I think it's it's interesting, it's not really a benchmark because really we use it to test internally against regressions, right? So if we say that we're improving ACT performance, how do we know that we're actually improving ACT performance? Theoretically, we don't know that we're improving it. What we have to do is basically ensure that we're not breaking performance and then add a new eval that tests the new feature.
Yeah. Ultimately, yes. You want to make sure you don't have regressions, and then ideally you continue to improve your eval data set over time and add more, more and more tests basically along the way to make sure that you're continuing to make it better.
Exactly. And I think it's actually more like regular software engineering as opposed to AI engineering, right? Because benchmarks, you actually want those to be as low as possible so that they can, increase over time as models get better. But this is more like you want this to be as close to 100% at all times. So yeah, you can I think this is a really interesting visual here is that, this is actually a surprise for us. We just defaulted to GPT-4o for vibes. It's just everyone just sees OpenAI or Anthropic. And then in building this, we were like, oh my God, Gemini is actually really, really good and it's super cheap. So why are we not using that as the default?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I don't see Claude 4 on here. I imagine that's coming.
Actually, so that's the interesting thing, right? So Claude 3.5 and Claude 3.7 are 40 times the price of Gemini and less accurate. And so Claude 4 is relatively similar, right? I think that when you're paying an order of magnitude less for Gemini and getting better results, it actually just doesn't make sense to even try Claude 4 because it's just a different use case, right? In what case would you recommend paying, again, 40 times more? And even if it's 92% more accurate or 92% accurate, it's not enough to convince me to switch off of Gemini. But what is interesting, though, is that, I think the nice thing about Stagehand is it's just tool execution. So once you know, hey, I want to click the sign in button, you can use Stagehand to click the sign in button. But where Claude is actually really good is determining what to do, right? So we talked about Stagehand being this thing of the agent can only do this, but the agent has to know what to do as well. And I think that, with MCP and everything, we're seeing that if you hook up these Stagehand tools to an agent, being Claude is really, really, really good at accomplishing long-running agentic tasks. So when Claude 4 came out, actually, I did some fun experiments. I follow basketball. I'm a huge Cavs fan. And I just, asked Claude 4 Opus, hey, do your research on what you think the Cavs should do in the offseason, and then make a potential trade on the NBA trade machine. And it did it. It was a valid trade. It was one that made sense. And it's the fact that it was able to call the Stagehand tools appropriately. I think that's where agents are headed, right? In terms of knowing what to do and reasoning about an arbitrary situation, as opposed to just, a very simple task of analyze this DOM and get the right element.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think as we continue, as models get better, being able to have it do increasingly complex tasks over time seems like the path we're on, right? I do still, as many, I mentioned, I joked earlier, but also seriousness, things still break down pretty regularly, right? I think we all experience that. But if anyone that's probably watching this does see you wouldn't be watching this if you didn't see the promise and where this stuff is going. And I do think that increased complexity of being able to give a more, kind of general task and then have it actually go out and make a plan, execute the plan with the tools it has. That's where the ball is going, not to use the sports analogy since we're talking sports.
No, 100%. I think what's interesting too is I was at this event a couple months ago, and this person came up to me and said, yo, yeah, MCP is like the internet for agents. And I was like, okay, like, relax, right? I think it just felt like the most buzzwordy thing I'd ever heard. But I think looking back, I think, hype aside, I think there's some truth to that. Especially given that, the internet itself is just a conversation between your computer and some other computer in US East 1. I think MCP, sorry, still sticking to the internet, when you hit an API, you're not just hitting like one monolithic API that gives you a response, right? You're actually hitting an API that hits its own APIs, that hit their own APIs, and they all just kind of collate together and give you one final response. And I think that's what's really interesting about MCP and how we design Stagehand as well, where, Claude, when it's executing this plan, it can just take a screenshot and just say, okay, given the screenshot, I think we should probably click this button. And you don't need to pollute the context of that agent with the content of the DOM and figuring out how to do all that. It can just kind of throw that at an isolated agent, like a mini agent. So it becomes kind of like agent microservices in a way.
Yeah, agents all the way down.
It's microservices all the way down, right? Yeah. But I think that's what's really interesting too. Is like, yeah, agents talking to mini agents that can, like for example, with Claude is the one determining what to do, and it's offloading that to Gemini to actually do it. So
yeah, the whole idea of like agents that talk to agents and like the composition of different models talking to each other, I think that's going to be pretty common, because I do think that we're going to find there are certain models that do better at different types of tasks, right? Specifically, like you might need image generation. Well, there's certain models that are going to do that really well. You might need, writing code, which maybe Claude does slightly better than others, on writing code. But obviously, using Stagehand, it seems like Gemini is much better at, navigating maybe the web. And so there's, I do think, and then it'll change over time, right? As models, new models come out, they'll kind of jump each other. And so making it one agent that can kind of communicate through some kind of protocol, which MCP at least is what seems to be leading the way right now with how that's going to work. Seems like the future that we're probably heading towards, right?
100%, right? Like even like with MCP, even outside the context of Stagehand, right? Like you have like a docs MCP where, you could ask Claude, hey, how do I do this using Mastra? And Mastra, Claude would probably offload that to a docs MCP, which could then further specialize that into, okay, where's like the Mastra MCP within my docs registries? I saw you guys built an MCP registry. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah. But it was the joke that there's so many registries. How are you going to keep them? And then, like it'll get easier over time. But yeah, we do have the Mastra MCP registry, which we try to keep track of all the available MCP registries that are popping up.
But I think that's interesting too, right? Like what does like DNS look like in this like agent web? What does, Chromium look like? If you're talking about like internet for agents, what are the internet building blocks in the context of AI?
And what are the mechanisms for an agent to potentially be able to look up MCPs and then, get permission to use those, organically, rather than having to have some kind of defined system prompt and set of tools, at build time or whatever. You can basically do it at runtime and allow your agent to like go out and find its own tools and then, navigate and use those as needed, and then maybe get rid of them or if it doesn't need it, anymore. So
100%.
Yeah, I think that's again, it's hard. It's difficult to see that because there's still a lot of ground we have to make in order to get there. But I do see that as like what's potentially coming in the next, 12 months. And I think we'll at least have really cool demos of things doing that. And maybe that's even a long timeline. I don't know.
I think it's interesting too, like how different models are kind of contributing to vendor lock-in in different ways. They all have their own unique features. Like OpenAI, for example, they have like reasoning models are just a separate class, right? Like GPT 4.1 just cannot do reasoning. Versus with Claude, they're like, oh, you can just throw in a reasoning step to Sonnet. Also, I think just the most annoying thing for us personally is that Claude is the only one that supports multimodal tool output in terms of especially MCP. So I mentioned earlier that Claude can be a web agent because it can take a screenshot and reason about what to do. But only Claude can do that, which is the weirdest thing. Like no other LLM provider can use a screenshot tool, which is just the most mind-boggling thing.
Yeah,
then sorry. Go ahead.
we have many, at least it's come up a couple times where users of Mastra are building tools that need to take a screenshot. And so they're using Claude because it's the only one that really has multimodal support. But also, in Mastra, we try to support any provider, but we need, not every provider does support that specific type of feature, right? So
Yep.
it is it's frustrating that the other models don't support it, but also I'm grateful that Claude does, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'm curious also, like, in this time, how do you guys think about incorporating different LLMs, right? I think like for Stagehand, one of the biggest pieces of tech debt that we're getting around is when we started, we were like, okay, we're going to use our own LLM client implementations. So we didn't use Vercel AI SDK or anything. We just used the straight OpenAI SDK and the Anthropic SDK. And it was just the worst because different LLMs came up, like Gemini, for example. This is why we ignored Gemini for the longest time, because we had to write a separate LLM client implementation for it. But like, using AI SDK has been really nice for us. But how are you guys thinking about, LLMs as they evolve and incorporating all their different use cases into one nice abstraction?
So we also started, we were going to roll everything ourselves, and we did that. And then we also use AI SDK now. So I think it's just, it's, the common way to do it. It's like we all, like, I didn't know that you were using AI SDK, for instance, and I bet you might not have known that we were using AI SDK, but it does make sense. And I think that's where, if we can agree that we're going to have this SDK that does provide this kind of model routing, and we can build on top of that, then ideally we just contribute back if needed to help make sure that that mission is solved, because obviously it helps Stagehand, it helps Mastra, it helps, Vercel and their interests with, using AI SDK and V0 or wherever else they might be using it.
100%. I think that's like really cool too, right? Like, I think for all of us in the TypeScript ecosystem, like us using AI SDK, as you mentioned, right? You can build an MCP server using Mastra, throw it, Stagehand tools, using our AI SDK integration as well, and like choose your LLM using, so I think, yeah, it's really cool. Like, I think in JavaScript land, everyone kind of coalesces on like one stack, like the MERN stack or something, right? Back in the day. And I think now you're seeing like the same similar thing where you build like Mastra for your agent, like AI SDK for your LLM client, hopefully Stagehand for your browser tools. So yeah, super cool ecosystem.
Yeah. And I think it's, you're seeing more and more adoption and more different, like really cool projects being launched in the TypeScript ecosystem. So excited to see, as, I think we're kind of just at the beginning. We of course are kind of all in on TypeScript and believe that, even though Python, it made sense for Python to be the dominant language, and I don't think it's going away. Like, there's going to be a lot of people using Python for AI for a very long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially when you get to the point where you need to get down to the model level and do, more training and tasks such as that. But for building applications, there's no reason that it needs to be Python. And so I think we're seeing more and more people choose the tools that they know. And I do think that even other languages will, are slowly popping up AI frameworks, which makes sense, right? I don't think it needs to be specifically just Python or TypeScript, though I do think that TypeScript is going to continue to be pretty prominent and growing over the next, next couple of years.
For sure. Yeah, I think TypeScript is like the application layer language, right? Versus Python is more the analysis and the like offline stuff.
Yeah, we like to joke internally at Mastra that, Python trains and TypeScript ships. So
hell yeah.
And so one of our engineers had made like a Studio Ghibli image of like a Python on a train and then like a TypeScript ship. It's funny. I'll pull it up at some point. But this has been a lot of fun. Anything else that is going on in Stagehand that you want to share with the 150-ish people watching right now?
Yeah, I think what's really cool too is like I'm trying to take evals one step forward. Something I did is like a fun experiment. If you do npm create browser app -- example chess, you can actually just watch OpenAI and Anthropic 1v1 each other in chess. That was just like a fun. I was just like, okay, so we allow you to use any computer use agent in the browser. So I just wanted to find a cool way to kind of showcase that, right? And you can have like agent 1 equals Anthropic, agent 2 equals OpenAI. And it was just really cool there to see. Sorry.
Do you have a link where we can show that on the screen?
Let me,
you can send it in this private chat and I'll pull it up, or you can just share your screen. be cool for
Yeah.
those of you who want to see it. Let's.
Let me see.
I see. Is it create browser app?
Yeah, it's npm create space browser dash app dash dash example space chess. I got Connect 4. Here's Connect 4, for example.
Otherwise, I'm feeling pretty brave. I can run this thing locally if you want me to, and we can just try it right now.
Yeah. Do you have a browser-based account?
I do, but I'd have to probably log in. But I'll pull this up and we'll take a look at this. This is a.
Yeah, I think the Kua agents can be a little iffy locally because of like browser dimensions, but it works a lot better on browser base.
Yeah. Well, here we go.
That's Connect 4. So that's not computer use, but I think what's generally really fun is just having agents play each other in chess. Oh, there we go. I found the chess link. But yeah, it's just like, it's really cool because you can see here like how it's reasoning about what move to make next. And I think what's really cool about games specifically or in the context of agent evals is that, especially in the context of strategy, there's often like a really like a right move to make. And so I'll leave you with this, right? I think no one's going to reward hack and build an agent that's the best at Connect 4. But I think that what we're trying to get at is if you can judge at every move how good the move was relative to the moves that it could have made, you can effectively judge an LLM based off of how good it is at calling tools and calling the right tools, and also reasoning about an arbitrary scenario. And so if you can present Connect 4, an arbitrary situation, to an LLM in a way that the LLM can reason about and understand the situation, and the LLM can actually do it well, then the problem just becomes communicating an arbitrary situation to an LLM. And so if you can assign a score of how well an LLM can reason about this arbitrary situation, then you can expound upon that. And instead of Connect 4, you could build it, for websites or for browser agents. So
yeah, very cool.
There.
And I think this is probably the best place for people to follow you.
Yes, sir.
Check out, go give Stagehand a star on GitHub, and check out Annie's X account. Follow for, your good follow for all the kinds of browser agent type content. Anything else that you want to say before we sign off?
Likewise, just thank you so much for having me here. Appreciate your content and the whole Monster team's content. Big fan of you guys. Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Yeah, of course. Same when it comes to browser base. Definitely big fans. So, I'll chat with you on our Slack at some point soon, I'm sure.
Yes, sir.
All right.
I'll see you around.
Yeah, we'll see you. All right, everyone. If you just joined, we talked a little bit about AI news. We talked a little bit about Claude 4, reviewed some of the system prompt highlights. We talked about how Claude 4 could maybe, if you're using the Opus model, maybe just call the authorities on you, which is fun or interesting or concerning. We talked about, or we did test out OpenAI's operator, and because it is now using O3 under the hood, we tested that out. It kind of worked, even though we had some bugs. We did test out Codex, and honestly, I was pretty impressed with Codex. We gave it very simple tasks, of course, but it did, for all the simple tasks I gave it, it did work. It did have some issues where it thought things were bugs that I don't think actually were bugs. I didn't look into it that much, but go back and watch the recording if you're curious on how OpenAI Codex works or what we got it to do. All the recordings are always available immediately following. We're live on YouTube, but also the recordings are available on YouTube after the fact. And then we talked with Annie from Stagehand about some of the evals that they're doing, some of the stuff that Stagehand is working on, talked about browser agents in general. So appreciate you all joining us today. This is a pretty short episode. We kept it at an hour, 15 minutes. Normally, lately, it seems like we've been going 2 hours every time. But we're going to sign off now, and I imagine, you might see Abhi again in the EU time zone while he's kind of doing his Europe tour. So you might get 2 AI agents hours some of these days. But for the most part, we are Monday through Friday, right around noon Pacific time. We try to go for 1 to 2 hours every day, try to bring you keep you up to date on what's happening with some news. We talk to some people from the Master team. We highlight, interesting uses of agents, and we bring on really awesome guests. So Make sure to follow the Mastra AI account on Twitter or X if you're not already. You can follow me as well, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.